On June 17th at 7 o'clock in the evening, I attended a webinar concerning the former Kapyong Barracks in Winnipeg. And I just like to show you some slides and narrate what I saw. Please note that there were about 700 or so people who basically were involved. At least that's what it showed me online through Zoom. And what follows here is a summary of the presentation, and I will add some of my comments to it. First off, we have a slide showing the master plan, and some of the panelists are shown on the right. They were knocked off the air actually for quite a few minutes because of a lightning strike, but they came back on and didn't seem to discourage anybody from participating. We then heard from Sam Blake, Chief, gave us greetings. It was a pre-recorded greeting. And these are the panelists who spoke from time to time during the presentation. Cheryl Dixon was the facilitator. Started off with an agenda that was presented to us, and the agenda we went through, it took us a little over an hour to go through this entire agenda. Just to remind you, anytime you want to stop this presentation and go back over some of the slides, you're more than welcome to do so. We were asked several poll questions during the presentation. The first one was asked just before the presentations began. They wanted to know where people lived who were signed up for this event. And you'll notice that most people live in and around the area that we're concerned with, and only 8% were living outside of Winnipeg, actually including one of the panelists. They asked whether or not people have actually done some research beforehand, and 61% had. And then they began by talking about the neighborhood itself. And this is not a very good map that they presented. You could probably find better ones online, but it gives you an idea of the area that's going to be developed. They talked about the Treaty 1 Development Corporation, one of the two major players here. This is their mission statement, and it shows you some of the participants in the Treaty 1 Development Corporation listed here. The other major player is the Canada Lands Company, and they've developed land right across the country. The land that is being considered for redevelopment is being divided between the Treaty 1 First Nations, 68%, mostly along the Kinnison area, and the Canada Lands Company will develop the other acreage, about 32%, much of it facing into Tuxedo. These areas across the country are called urban economic development zones, or urban reserves, which is what historically they've been called. And this is going to be an urban reserve. There are these urban economic development zones right across the country. Here's some examples across the country, and here are some examples in Winnipeg, some of which you may not even know are urban reserves. Peguis First Nation is on Portage Avenue, and the Swan Lake First Nation is out in Headingley. This is their project aspiration. These are their goals. They have 7 aspirations, actually, and they went through each one of them. The first one is they want to promote prosperity and partnerships. Second goal is to build community, a diverse, inclusive community, which they've been successful in doing in other parts of the country. They want to celebrate identity, Indigenous identity especially. They want to build something that will be sustainable for future generations. They want to promote and celebrate Indigenous design. There's going to be areas set aside for higher learning, education, One of the speakers talked about the possibility of having student housing there. And finally, they want to showcase innovation, especially Indigenous innovation. Then they stopped and they asked the people who were participating, and again, there were around 700 or so that were at this point signed on. They asked us what is really important to you about the development, and you'll notice the results from most people involves they wanted park and open spaces. Second were places for recreation, and they also like the idea of infrastructure for pedestrians and cyclists. So those are the kind of things that people were hoping for who signed up for this. Community character, basically there are 7 kinds of development that they wanted to deal with. And you'll notice there is some color coding here, which may not be clear. And that's important to note because when you take a look at future slides, they're color coded. They want community spaces, first of all. They want areas for sports and recreation. They're planning on low-density residential development and medium-density residence, which basically could be high-rise. They're also looking for, and they do stress this quite a bit, cultural campus education and commercial development, and finally, mixed use. Which takes us to one of 3 concept plans. They have 3 concept plans altogether. There's not a heck of a lot of difference amongst them, but they went over what might be developed there, and this is where the color coding comes in. You'll notice that they've color-coded the areas that are going to be mixed use, commercial, etc. This is the first plan. This is the second one. And this is the third one. Now, they weren't above modifying this to suit people's needs or wants. They are going to be surveying the community in the near future and try to finalize the kind of concept plan to develop. So this is a place where they're at. The phase 2 is what we're doing right now, developing and refining the concept plans. They're hoping by the middle, towards the end of the summer, to have the master plan developed. And then finally, they would apply to put the master plan into operation by the end of this year. I'm told that the renovations or the deconstruction of existing buildings will be finished probably by either the end of this year or beginning of next year. And so construction won't start until 2021. And then finally, we were asked whether or not this information that was presented was helpful in understanding what the project was. And if you look at the strongly agree and agree, a huge majority of people thought this was very good. I've just given you a very brief outline for those who missed it. Finally, I just want to give you an idea of how the conversation went, sort of summarizing what was going on. Several questions were asked at the end after the summary about what's going on. I'll let you listen to them now.
As well as we are in discussions with the City of Winnipeg. As of right now, please follow us on our website and for more information. So we're not there yet, but we are working towards it. So please follow us.
Cheryl, if I might add to that.
Go ahead, Mike.
The city over many years has done transportation master plan, and they've been studying Kenaston, and obviously they've come a long way. But admittedly, they didn't know exactly where the ownership group was going with the former Kapyong Barracks site. They did make allowances, and now that we have these concepts and we can develop more an understanding of how the detail of those allowances fit, we've had very productive meetings with the city, and that's an ongoing piece. But it's early in the Kapyong Barracks former site to do that, other than now integrating with the city teams and coming up with the right answers.
And also just wanted to add too that, our lands department is working diligently as well. They are working with our First Nation leaders to ensure that at the end of the day, we want to be a good corporate citizen. If it's a good thing for the city, if it's a good thing for Manitoba, obviously, we want to work with the community.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next question I'm going to put to Mike. How will transit and active transportation be integrated into the site? Mike, do you want to?
Yeah, interesting. Well, the entire public space system and the routing that we've chosen is trying to create a seamless and very organic, attractive routing for active transportation and for pedestrians. We also are working with the city and transit on creating the best transit experience you can imagine. We're looking at everything from walking and waiting distances. It's at a high level right now, potentially integrating people coming from transit and arriving in a warm environment, like one of the pieces of the village that we're talking about, or waiting in a nicer environment to access transit. So again, it's early in the transportation planning, including pedestrian, but it's at a high level a priority.
Yeah, and maybe I just add in terms of transit, I think proximity to high frequency transit service not only will help support the redevelopment, but the planned density and mix of uses that are envisioned in the concept plans that we presented tonight, I think also can have a really important benefit for transit by generating the ridership that we need to support the high frequency transit. So I think the investments play off each other. It's an important piece.
Okay, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Tom. Another question, will the soldiers who fought at Kapyong, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, be acknowledged in some way? Waylon, are you able to take this question?
Sure. I mean, part of our original discussion was to honor our veterans, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. There was talks of a war museum. We've already stated in our discussions, or we've had discussions with military organizations, as well as our leadership in our communities, that when the opportunity presents itself, obviously we want to acknowledge those veterans.